5:29.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started.
Okay, let us
Welcome everyone to the Historic District Landmark Board meeting. It is March 11th, 2021. And I am calling this meeting to order. I am not the chair. We don't have a chair right now. So as I explained previously to the board members, I will be acting as the chair for the first few items until we elect a chair. And then from that point, whoever is elected as our chairperson will continue running the meeting from that. So the first thing I'd like to do is call roll call. Vanessa, if you could please call roll.
Absolutely. Vanessa Guerra for the record. Rebecca Sepulveda. Did you hear her, Kirby?
Yeah, can you?
Okay. Justin Allen Hansnurcher.
Here. Present.
Robert Gonzalez.
Present.
Maria Elena Morales.
Present.
Cristina Davila Villarreal.
Present.
Wayne Nance.
Present.
Stanley Green.
Present.
Priscilla Iglesias. And Mark Gonzalez.
Present.
For the record, you do have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Guerra. And my name is Kirby Snideman. I'm the planning director for the city. I'd like to welcome the new members. If the new members could briefly introduce themselves in this order: Mark Gonzalez, Priscilla Iglesias, and Wayne Nance.
Hi, Mark Gonzalez, local attorney here in Laredo. Good to meet everybody. Glad to be on board.
And Mark is the District 8 appointee.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Priscilla Iglesias. I am the executive director for Laredo Main Street, and I was appointed by District 7, I believe.
Hello, Wayne Nance. I'm an engineer here in town. I work at Porras Engineering, and I was appointed by Ruben, Councilman Ruben.
And that's District 6, right?
He's District 5.
5. Okay. Well, welcome to our new members. I'm very excited for each of y'all to join. You have some very specific set of skills that I think will very much benefit this board, and so it's great to have you. All right, moving right on to item number 4 is the election of officers. And the way that I'd like to do this is first, we'll take anyone that would suggest somebody for the role of chairperson. We'll do this one first, and then we'll do vice chairperson. So for chairperson, do I hear any?
I nominate Rebecca Sepulveda.
Okay, are there any other nominations for our chairperson?
Yes, I nominate Justin.
Okay, Justin Hansnurcher. And are there any other nominations? Do I hear any other nominations for chairperson?
Kirby, we don't approve the minutes.
We're going to do that after. As soon as we get chairperson, I'll let that person take over.
Okay, I guess I missed that. Sorry.
That's okay. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for checking, Mr. Green. Okay, hearing only 2. All right, let's start with Ms. Sepulveda, who was nominated first. Can I get a vote by yay or nay? Well, no nay, just a yay if you would like Ms. Sepulveda as your chairperson.
Yay.
Yay.
I'll go with a yay. That name came out real quick, and that's all I got to go on right now.
Okay. Mr. Nance, Ms. Villarreal, and Mr. Green. Anyone else?
Roberto Gonzalez, yay.
Okay. Are you going to vote for yourself, Ms. Sepulveda?
No.
Okay. All right. We have 4 then. Ms. Villarreal, Mr. Nance, Mr. Green, and who was the other one? Oh, and Mr. Gonzalez. Okay. And for Mr. Huntsnurcher,
Maria Elena Morales voted for him.
Ms. Morales, anyone else?
Yay.
Mr. Gonzalez,
Gracias.
Iglesias? And Mr. Huntsnurcher, are you going to vote for yourself?
I'll abstain.
Okay. All right. Well, and it looks like Ms. Sepulveda, you are elected the chairperson. Ms. Sepulveda, would you like to take over from here with the election of the vice chairperson?
Will do.
And can
I'd
I,
like
sorry, Ms. Sepulveda, can I ask if you're not speaking, just to mute yourself? That will make the audio much better quality for everybody.
Yes. I would like to entertain a motion for, no, I'd like to entertain nominations for vice chairperson. I would like to nominate Mr. Huntsnurcher.
I'll second that.
I move that nomination cease.
Are there any other nominations from the floor? There being no other nominations, I'd like to call for a vote on the nominations for vice chairperson, Mr. Huntsnurcher. May I have everyone's vote, please?
Yay.
Maria Elena Morales votes yes.
It appears that Priscilla Iglesias, Dan Green, Wayne Nance,
Maria Elena Morales.
Magdalena Morales, Roberto Gonzalez, and my vote in affirmative,
And me.
and Christina. So we have elected a vice chairman, Justin Huntsnurcher.
Thank you, board. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, let's move on. Item 5, approval of minutes. Mr. Sneidman, do you have them on the screen for us to review? Because I don't think many of us had an opportunity to review them in advance.
Sorry, Ms. Chairperson, I just realized I was muted. If we can we move on to citizens' comments, and I'll get that queued up so that you can see it I can put it up on the screen.
Certainly. Is staff going to help us to connect people, or how does citizen comments work?
Yes, ma'am. This is being broadcast live on Spectrum Channel 1300 and live on the website. There is, however, a lag of a couple minutes, so if we could leave this up for a couple minutes, this phone number, and if we receive any calls from the public, we will alert you. If we don't alert you, there are no calls from the public. So if we can leave that up for a bit, we'll get the minutes for you as well during this time.
Very good.
Okay, the meetings are up, or the meeting minutes from our January meeting. Can I ask everybody to mute themselves if you're not speaking? All right, Ms. Sepulveda, you are muted, and we haven't received any calls from the public, so we can move on if you would like, and these are the minutes from.
Board members, if you have had an opportunity to review the minutes, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
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 The ayes have it. The next item, I believe, was the presentation, Mr. Sneidman?
That's correct. Yes, we don't have any items on the agenda. There were no applications that were submitted in time for this meeting, but I thought it'd be a good opportunity, one, so that we could elect new officers, and also we could have a little bit of time to talk about direction going forward. We have some new members and with some new developments on the staff side for the historic district. So if you'd like, I'd like to give a presentation. It should take about 15 minutes, and then some questions. Either if you have questions throughout the presentation or at the end if you want to have some more discussion. And this presentation, I would like your recommendation on a couple items going forward on some changes that could happen sooner than later. And then some changes some proposed changes would need more time. So with this presentation, I'd like to give you just a really brief review of the purpose of historic districts, talk a little about the history of historic districts here in Laredo and historic preservation in Laredo, talk generally about some of the challenges I've seen as I've been here the last couple of years with the historic district program as it is, talk about opportunities that there are for the future, and then be specific on those changes that I'm proposing and would like to get your input on. So first of all, talking about the purpose of historic districts. You know, historic preservation is something that's been going on for a long time. When the Romans would move into a new area, they often would encourage some preservation of historic structures they found. So that's at least 2,000 years old of some amount of historic preservation. Individuals have been preserving buildings of value for a long time, but historic preservation program in the United States are relatively new, the last few decades. And the purpose of historic districts is generally to do two things, to do one or two things. Not all historic districts do both. Some historic districts just do one. But the first is to preserve the historic structures. This is what all historic districts do. They are set up in such a way so that they have requirements in place, usually requirements that are more strict than the general zoning ordinances. And they require the owners of these properties or buildings to preserve the structures to some degree for future generations. Now, a second thing that not all, but some historic districts do is they curate a historic vernacular. What does that mean? It means that there's a predominant architectural style that they want to perpetuate with anything new that's built in the historic district. So typically with these two things, they have slightly different aims individually, but together some historic districts do both. An example of historic vernacular, just to explain that a little more, if any of y'all have been to Santa Fe, New Mexico, you've seen that they have Pueblo and Pueblo Revival. There is very it's not easy to miss. You know, a lot of architecture you can look at and not realize, oh, that's this certain architectural style. This is very, very unique, and so those of you that have visited probably noticed that oh, there's something different about Santa Fe, and when somebody builds new structures there, in their districts that have this, they want to preserve that architectural style. So they're not just interested in preserving the historic structures, but they want to perpetuate that style because it's so predominant in the community. Another example is Greek Revival in historic districts in New Orleans. They have several historic districts, and there's one in particular that has quite a bit of Greek Revival, and they want to maintain that style. So a question for you, what is Laredo's historic vernacular? What is Laredo's predominant style? Well, I'm glad I'm stumping you because there isn't a historic vernacular. There isn't a predominant style. What there is a mix of many architectural styles and colors and materials. And for anybody familiar with the 3 historic districts that are here, could easily recognize that. For the history of the Laredo's historic districts, their preservation efforts are many years old in Laredo, formally starting, as far as I could tell, in the 1970s. And I'm sure Christina could speak to the history of her organization, which predates what we do over here in the city. But the rules that we currently have, those were put in place in the 1990s. First, a historic district ordinance that outlined the rules for the historic district and then were amended. And then a historic preservation plan that was produced and adopted in 1996, and historic urban design guidelines, which followed in 1997. Now, speaking of some of the challenges of the historic district that I've seen as I've been here a couple of years, and feel free to chime in and speak to this, if you want to share any of your input. But has the last 3 decades of historic district led to improvement of the area? The challenge is with the historic district, if you were, for those of you that were here in the 1990s and you look at the number of properties and the conditions of those properties in the downtown or in the 3 historic districts, you might ask yourself, has the program met its goal of improving the condition of these properties? I think we've seen some improvement in the properties, but many of the properties in these districts have seen a lot of decline. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's not all on the program. It, I think, has a lot to do with the economics of Laredo, where some cities in Texas have seen a revival of their downtowns and their urban cores. Laredo hasn't for several reasons. And I think one of the biggest reasons probably is that, where a lot of cities bottomed out in the 1970s, 1980s, in terms of the value of properties downtown, Laredo was kept afloat because of the demand for wholesaling in downtown. A lot of properties could be purchased and used as warehousing or associated with wholesaling, and that kept prices very high. But it was a unique situation because the people who were purchasing a lot of these properties involved in that business didn't need to necessarily make the properties look better because they're selling to wholesalers. They're not selling to, it's not a retailer. It's not somebody who's selling to an end customer. It's somebody who's just selling to another business person who's then taking that and using it somewhere else. That's not the entire reason. That's maybe just part of the reason why property values have been kept up. And the challenge with property values not bottoming out is what you saw in Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, San Angelo, a lot of Corpus Christi, saw properties bottom out, and then it took time for reinvestment to come back in. But usually when properties are low, people that are creative, artists, new owners, new restaurants, things can come in at relatively low investment and then make change that then others find trendy and attractive and join into that. And that cycle hasn't quite happened the same way in Laredo. Now, another challenge that the reputation of the historic district discourages investment. Now, I don't want any of you to take that personally because I know some of you have been involved with this board for several years. That's not in any way meant to speak to anybody or any group. I mean, the city has as much as responsibility as anybody in that, but it is a reality. I get calls from people from the city and from outside of the city who will call me and ask me if a property is in the historic district. And when I tell them it is, when I first got these calls, when I started as a planning director a couple of years ago, I was excited because I love the historic downtown. It's a big reason of why I'm here in Laredo, why I decided to come. So I was excited to hear people call and say, hey, is this property in the historic district? And I'm thinking they want to get involved in the program. And when I told them it was, they said, okay, good. I'm glad you told me. I don't want to be there. I'm going to look somewhere else. That's unfortunate. It really is unfortunate. And it's something that we can change. And, Ms. Villarreal has made this point. A lot of the items that come before the historic board get approved. Still, though, it has that reputation of being a roadblock, being an obstacle. And I believe we need to change that, because if somebody's making an investment, just the possibility that it's not going to work is enough to keep them away. And they need to be reassured that this is not a roadblock. Instead, it's something that can incentivize investment in their investment. Another challenge that the ordinance lacks clarity. There's some confusion over what the rules are and how it applies. We're going to speak to that a little bit, and specifically about the confusion of what requires approval. And I brought that to the board several months ago, last year, and what I was told is that you want to continue with how the tradition was, and that is any change of historic property needs to come to the historic board. But do you really mean any change? If somebody wants to put in a tree, if somebody wants to put up a birdhouse, if somebody wants to put up a mailbox, if somebody wants to attach to get cable, and so the cable box has to go on the house, do they have to come for historic approval for that? That's a change. There's a general misunderstanding about the purpose of the program. They may not understand why it is we have this program in terms of the general public. What is it meant to do? There's a lot of properties not complying with this ordinance. That's a big challenge. And because enforcement in the city is done by complaints, we don't have zoning officers that go and drive around the city looking for issues. We just don't have enough staff to do that. So we respond to complaints. And because of that, the enforcement isn't equal. We've got a few people in the district over the years who've been serial reporters, is what I'll call them. And they've been reporting on people that they're not reporting on everybody. How it appears is they're reporting on people they don't like. They're not reporting on everybody in the district. And so what you'll find is that some people get free rein to do what they want to their properties, and others, they try to make one small change, they get reported. They get cited, and they have to come before the historic board. That's not fair, and it shouldn't be that way. And then also another challenge, that the historic district boundaries don't reflect the public's perception of what is historic, what the historic neighborhood would be. In other words, if you ask the public, hey, where's the St. Peter's historic district? They would say maybe, St. Peter's Square and those nice homes around St. Peter's Square and maybe down a couple of those streets. But if I showed them the boundaries, the large boundaries of those properties and how many properties were included, I think the vast majority of people, at least the ones I've showed it to that didn't know before, were very surprised to see how big that was. Now let's talk about some opportunities, some things that have been happening. There's interest, I would say significant interest in property, these properties downtown for restaurants, for Airbnbs, for small offices, and even for housing in these historic districts. And some of it is, a little bit of it started to happen, but when I say interest, I mean there's calls. People are making calls, and we're hearing about people wanting to purchase properties and wanting to look in these areas. The downtown tours, which I sit on, it's been several years in the making, but finally we're ready to start putting funding, and we're going to be bonding for millions of dollars to do some construction projects in the historic districts in the east, in the downtown area, not St. Peter's, but in the downtown area. Like I mentioned, there's renewed interest in housing. The old Hilton Tower was recently purchased, and the owner of that is looking at doing residential there, some studio apartments. There are other people who are buying homes in the area. I'm one of those. I purchased a home in the historic district, and so it's of interest to me to see if I see any new people walking around. Just the other day, I met somebody who's a new employee at the district court, and I saw him always walking back and forth, and I said hello to him the other day and said, hey, do you live in the neighborhood? He says, yeah, I hate commuting, which is my same reason why I want to live so close to work, because I get so stressed out when I have to commute. And he said, yeah, I'm going to be looking for something. But he said, oh, it's so hard to find something down here. And, there aren't a lot of properties that come up. Well, one really interesting development is that LASD, Laredo School District, they're vacating several properties. It's over a dozen properties, and it counts for more than that in buildings because some of the buildings are more than one property. They're getting ready to vacate all those properties, almost all the buildings that they own in the St. Peter's area this summer when they move into their new administration building. And I've been working with the district to say, hey, the way you did it last time where you did a blind bid, there is another way you could do it. You could do an open bid, and you could even put conditions on the bid so that the people who buy them have to be homeowners, or they have to be property owners, business owners that are actually going to be there, not somebody that's going to hold it. And I'm hoping to present to their board pretty soon about this. And I would like to be able to tell them we're making some new developments in the historic district to make it, to deal with those challenges that we have. So let's talk a little bit about the proposed changes. First of all, we have a new historic preservation officer, Vanessa Guerra, who is probably our most experienced planner here in the city. I needed someone who could take this on and do a fantastic job with it. I didn't want to put a new planner in there because, as you know, our previous historic district historic preservation officer retired. And I wanted somebody who had a lot of experience, a lot of know-how, and was going to be able to take this program, take the historic district and really make it into a program. So I'm really excited Vanessa has accepted that responsibility, and she's our historic preservation officer, and she's hit the ground running and doing a fantastic job working with the applicants that we've had, and also helping with the program. Vanessa, I don't know if you want to jump in and say anything, introduce yourself to the board.
Good afternoon, Vanessa Guerra. As Kirby said, I've been with the city, with the planning department for over 20 years. And I started out with current planning and doing zoning and board of adjustment, writing ordinances. And subsequently I did transportation planning for 15 years. So this is a new challenge. This is definitely very exciting. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Vanessa. And one other change that I've already implemented is that there's no more administrative approval. There was nothing in the ordinance that allowed us to do that. What we were doing by tradition, I tried to look up how long we've been doing it. It seems like we've been doing it for several years, is that somebody would, the ordinance allows for repair and maintenance to occur without historic board approval. However, what we were requiring someone to do is to submit to us to demonstrate that it was, what they were doing was repair and maintenance. That's not something we do for anything else. In other words, if someone asks us, hey, can I do this permitted use in this zone? And we say, well, here are the rules. And they say, okay, can I do that? Can I do a restaurant in this zone? Yeah, it's permitted in this zone. Okay. Then they make their own determination of whether or not they need to submit an application. And so for me to require somebody to submit an application demonstrating, if we explain the rules of what's repair and maintenance, it's up to them to decide whether or not they need to submit an application to the historic board. I mean, it's very clear if it's not repair and maintenance, then it needs to be submitted. So some of the things I'd like to ask y'all about is meeting dates on demand. So right now, and I'm going to get to this, it's actually the next item after this presentation. Right now, the way that we have our meeting dates, it's set up on a monthly occurrence, and there's a deadline for applications. And sometimes it might take as many as 6 weeks for somebody to submit something. So let's say you go to Home Depot and you see a nice mailbox you'd like to attach to your home. Well, guess what? You're going to have to wait 6 weeks to get historic board approved and pay a $100 fee to take your application to the historic board on whether or not you can put that, attach that to your home. Would be the case now because it's a change. And I'd like to suggest, and I've got some specifics for you later, how we could do a meeting schedule on demand. Since we don't get applications right now every month, it makes sense that we could be able to meet on demand and not take more than a couple meetings a month, and then be able to move this up within a couple weeks. Somebody submits something, we can get them within 2 weeks before the board. And also, I'd like to look at changing the noticing requirements. Right now, our ordinance requires that we notice it like we do a zone change. Well, the state of Texas requires zone changes for us to mail out to all the property owners within 200 feet. To do that, it's a 10-day noticing requirement by the state of Texas. Now, all of our meetings require 72 hours notice. That's what I'd like to require for this meeting, a 72-hour notice. Doing that would allow us to shrink the amount of time it takes to put a meeting before the board. And also, in my mind, somebody wanting to propose a change to their property, to the structure or property of their building, isn't the same a threshold as somebody who's wanting to change a zone, which is going to have bigger externalities on the neighborhood. For instance, if you were going to put a restaurant next door to you, that's going to have a significant impact in terms of traffic and other things on the neighborhood, whereas this isn't. And so it shouldn't have the same threshold as a zoning case. It's also a way we can speed things up in terms of like an application not taking so long. And then with our historic preservation officer and the long range planning staff that we have, I'm really excited now we finally have the staff where we can go through a historic preservation plan update and with new design guidelines or an updated design guidelines, and we can update the ordinance in full. That would be, in my mind, like a year-long process that would take a lot of effort and public involvement, a lot of public outreach to the historic district residents and business owners. And so that's not something we could do soon, but that's something we want to start with your support and definitely your involvement in that. Really excited about that. And then also I would ask this board to consider in the future updating the boundaries. And the reason I'll ask you to do that, I'll hold that off just for a second, but I want to say it's because I'll hold just for a second. But basically what I want to accomplish is to begin an effective preservation program and a preservation campaign that incentivizes instead of penalizes. And if I could boil it all down into one simple thing, what I want to do is more carrot and less stick. The carrot approach or the stick approach is we have rules and we penalize when people don't meet the rules. Every change that someone's going to do to their property requires approval, and that we have design, that the board has design authority over property owners. Now, again, remember in the beginning when I showed you that we don't have a historic vernacular in Laredo. And so in my mind, it doesn't make sense. While we do want to preserve historic structures, definitely, the value of the historic structures, we want to make sure they stay for years to come, for generations to come. I don't see how we should have the authority of design control over new improvements that are made in the district. In other words, if somebody has a historic structure they purchase, they should treat that in a way that they're not altering the historic structure. And the board should be here to help make that determination and to have oversight to protect that. So someone's not changing historic structure. But if they're building something new, or if they're adding on to it, and it's not connected to the building, or do we need to control it in such a way when we don't have a historic vernacular to base that off of? And then, with that stick approach, what we're generally doing is we're discouraging new investment in there. And I think you could arguably say that's the history of these last 3 decades of this program. That's the reputation it has, and it's there for a reason. While not in every case, as Ms. Villarreal points out, a lot of things get approved. There's enough of a roadblock that it does have that reputation, and it is discouraging investment. I would say we need to take more of a carrot approach with this. Every historic district is unique, and in Laredo, one of the big challenges here are the economics. The income that, or the financial resources that property owners have limits what can be done. And what we want to make sure is that we protect the historic structures, and the only significant changes that would affect those historic properties, that's what we're restricting. But instead, what the purpose of this district and board is there to do is to preserve, to incentivize, to instruct, to train. Just imagine it. If somebody was interested in a property, they could call up here and we could have resources for them on programs. We could find funding, special funding for facade improvement. We can't do that if we have so many properties in this historic district because they're so big. But imagine if the districts were a bit smaller and the number of properties weren't in the hundreds and hundreds of properties, but maybe more, in a smaller range that could be dealt with. and we had some actual funding dedicated for facade improvement, property improvement. And somebody could come and if they had a property, the red carpet was rolled out. We would meet them at their property. We could show them about what materials they could use and where they could find these. And basically, we would be here to assist a special assistance program for property owners in these districts. Then all of a sudden it creates an incentive where people are going to be wanting to be a part of this district because there are financial resources, there are staff resources, there's all kinds of resources there for them in this program, so that, well, hopefully it would create renewed interest to bring new investment to this area. Now, will it bring new activity? It will. That's always one of the challenges of a program where an area gets popular. You know, if you look at what's happened in other cities, in those areas that get popular, like Fredericksburg, Texas, their historic preservation program, one that incentivizes, not penalizes, has become very popular. And it's added a lot of restaurants and offices in areas where that creates some conflict with the existing residents. But to me, it's much worse to have vacant buildings, because vacant buildings deteriorate. Vacant buildings are the worst thing you could do to a historic district, because they deteriorate, they get ill-used, and they fall apart. Yeah, did somebody have a comment?
Yes, this is Roberto Gonzalez. Can I say something?
Sure, that's basically it that I wanted to, and then I just wanted to open up to your thoughts, your discussion, and maybe get a couple recommendations after we've had some discussion.
Well, I'm sorry, man. It's just you mentioned something I'm kind of passionate about. I own 2 homes in the historic district, and I've done them. You know, I mean, I've restored them from, you know, I mean, from ruin, and I've seen so many vacant homes continue to be vacant, and I've always wondered, why am I getting penalized for restoring Laredo's history? And I don't think anybody can understand that unless you've actually done it and say, why do I have to wait 6 weeks to paint my porch? It's not fair if you actually live there and go through it. And I wish more of us that are making these decisions could understand that and look at it and put yourself in those shoes. Why do I have to wait 6 weeks to paint my porch and pay $300, wait 6 weeks, and maybe get a no? I don't see how that's fair to somebody that's investing as much money as I've invested into the preservation of Laredo. I don't see how it's fair. And those are my 2 cents.
I kind of skipped over that, but one of the recommendations I'd like from this board to be able to take to the council is that only permitted activity be activity that requires board approval. In other words, right now, it is really unclear for property owners, well, what has to come, you know, there's things you have to get a building permit for, but what do I have to get historic board approval for? When I talked about this previously, y'all said everything. Does that really mean everything? Every change to a historic property? It shouldn't. But that's what we're interpreting right now, the ordinance to.
Anybody who does that, who wants that, should come and own a property here and live here.
Well, and the reality is it's not happening. It's not happening, and we're only enforcing on a few. So what I would ask is that that only permitted activity, and that is how I read the ordinance. If it requires a building permit, then and it's a change, so it's not repair and maintenance, then it has to come to the historic board for approval. And in the future, as we go through the plan, maybe we change that even more. Maybe we adapt that. Maybe we put in some preset guidelines that if you meet that, you don't need to come to it. But for right now, I would ask, and this is really important right now because of this recent freeze that we have a lot of people making repairs in the district that technically all need to come to the historic board for approval. What I would like to be able to tell them is only if it's a building permit do you need historic, only if it's a building permit and it's not repair and maintenance. So then so under that definition, I know the big one you might be difficult for some of y'all would say, well, wait, are you saying if you repaint then you don't need to come historic? I would say yes, because paint is something, two reasons. Paint can change. You can change it back, you can change it to another color. The other thing as well is there is no predominant architectural style or color in these historic districts. We've got yellow, we got green, we got red, we got blue, we got everything. So why are we saying that we should have design control over a certain color? So what I would ask you to do is for an immediate change that we could make is send a recommendation, give me your positive recommendation on this that we can ask council. We can amend the ordinance so that it's clear. It's only activity that requires a building permit and is not repair and maintenance. That's the activity that requires historic board approval for now.
Kirby, I agree that we need a change, and we've been asking for change for many years. We've been talking about revamping the ordinance for many years, the design guidelines, the color rules. But I'm glad that you're looking at a progressive program to encourage people, and that's what we all want. But I think that we can't throw out everything that we've done and built. So I think we need to take each of your recommendations one at a time, review them, get comment, input from the board, and move forward one step at a time, not all at once. And if you want to start with that one about permitting, I think we should look into it and figure out how we can best modify our rules. But I do believe that right now, as the ordinance exists, we are allowing people to do maintenance on their buildings. It's just that administratively, the city created a process for getting approval to do that. And I think mostly that's because some of us property owners were in fear that if we started to paint our structures, our neighbor would call the city and say, do they have permission? So we had to formalize that so that there was some kind of record that we had requested and received approval to move forward with our maintenance program. But if we can find some middle ground or some way to document these things, submit a letter, submit an email, whatever it is, I think, let's move forward. But let's take it one step at a time. That is my recommendation.
I want to add on that because I completely agree. In my position here at the Heritage Foundation, I probably get at least 5 phone calls a day about Historic Landmark Board because the public automatically assumes that the Webb County Heritage Foundation is the Historic Landmark Board. There's a lot of confusion. Now, although we are one of the entities in the Historic Preservation Plan that does carry out the Historic Preservation Plan, we are not the Landmark Board. And that is part of the frustration because they end up coming to me and many times they call the planning department, and for some reason the planning or they think they're calling the planning department, and they'll call me and say, no, well, they transferred me over to you, or they told me to call you. And then I send them back over there, and that causes a lot of problems and a lot of frustration with the applicant. I brought this up a while ago, and I think it was when you first came on board, Kirby. I think the budget had just passed as far as how much money was allocated to the Historic Landmark Board. And the reason why I asked that, because I had made a presentation to the board when I first came on the board about some findings and some lessons that I had learned at the National Trust for Historic Preservation Conference I attended every year. And they showed us websites. And I don't mean to put the City of Laredo's website down, but it's very hard to navigate. Right now that you had to explain to Ms. Sepulveda how to find minutes, that just seems to be, the case for everything on the city's website. Well, at least for this part of the website. So I had made a presentation on different websites, Spokane, Washington, Savannah, Georgia, Sarasota, Florida. They had websites that basically expedited and streamlined the process, where you would answer a couple of questions and it would say you do not need approval, or yes, you do need approval, and you could pay for everything online, and everything was on the website. They didn't have to go down to City Hall. They can upload things. They could take pictures from their phone. I think that the consensus that I've gotten, and I brought it up at this last National Trust meeting because I bring it up every year, it's how do I get certain, especially like the St. Peter's district, how do I help the residents there not be so afraid to go to the Landmark Board? And the advice was all the same. The process has to become easier, the application process, not necessarily the rules. The rules have to be clarified, but the process to apply The administrative part has to be easy for the applicant, whether that's reducing the cost. That definitely has to be something. I don't think that they should have to pay, and I understand that you have administrative costs, but that is something I think that needs to be reviewed. And also, I do strongly feel that a community will not take historic preservation as a priority if the city is not setting it as a priority as well. The city has to put it in. I mean, last time we were at zero funds for any kind of educational campaign. It has to be a line item in the budget, whether you know, something, $500, $1,000, something, not zero, because if the city's not making it a priority, then all these changes are not going to mean anything. We need to invest a little bit into our historic preservation plan. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but it needs to be something where that educational campaign or the Historic District Landmark Board will be, you know, put out into the public appropriately.
Yes, I agree, and that's what we're doing. We've dedicated staff to it, and we are going to be dedicated going forward. The first step would be the plan. So I'm not bringing all this to you at once. We're going to do a plan and a process and public involvement. We're going to build those things. Good news on the website. We're actually right now in the process of redoing our website. So very soon here within the next few weeks, we're going to have a new website. The best part about it is we're going to have control over it. Right now, if we need to make a change, it has to go to IT and it takes time. But we're going to actually set it up so we can make the changes as staff. So those changes can be made very quickly and we can amend things. I like where you're going with the online application, making it easier. Those are things we're doing for all of our applications. So today I'm only asking for a recommendation on two things. One we'll get to in a little bit, which is the date and time. And the other, which I'll ask when we're done, you know, discussing, is so that we can clarify the ordinance that only permitted activity is what goes before the historic board. Then it's clear. It's a very clear standard of what goes to the historic board and what doesn't. So we can you know, take more of your thoughts, more of your questions, but that's the thing I'd like to take to council, that change sooner, and then we'll start on all the planning and public involvement, the next steps.
Kirby, do you have something written on that proposal?
Well, it's just more of a, you know, it's not a, it's just that the requirement of what has to go to the historic board is permitted activity. So what I need to know is, does the majority of the board support that, or do you all not support that?
Well, if somebody wanted to paint their home hot pink in the St. Peter's district, that would be okay then?
That's right. That's right. And Ms. Villarreal, we've got a lot of different colors in this district. I don't, as a planning director overseeing this program, I don't see how we could pick a lot of colors and say, you like this. So as a board, you should then mandate but come on, can you think of a home in this area that's hot pink? You know, maybe you might see it in other parts of the city, but I don't think we're going to get all the homes painted hot pink is what I'm telling you. But we do have some yellows that were recently done. We do have some more hotter colors. So I don't know how those got approved because those weren't part of the, you know, of the approved color list. But yes, to answer your question short, I think that should be up to the property owner, given that we have so many different colors already in the district. We don't have a predominant color or style that we can justify why we would restrict it.
I believe we need to have a color proposal that it respects the architectural style of each building. Should be a blank historic palette, the way we have it now. And I think it's important to maintain the architectural integrity of these buildings. That's part of our role.
I certainly agree. And
so I don't agree that paint should be allowed. But I do have to reiterate, we already have in the ordinance what you're seeking, because we have a program that says if you're going to maintain your structure, you're allowed to do that without coming to the board, without paying $100, without applying, waiting 6 weeks, Roberto. You don't have to do that if you're going to do maintenance on your building. Now, if you're going to make
But that's not the case with, that's true with repair and maintenance. But if it's not repair and maintenance, where's the cutoff between what is up to the property owner and what change has to be made? Example, if you put in a tree, if you put in a bird box, does that require historic approval? It's a change. And right now, the way it's being interpreted is any change has to come to the historic board for approval. If you put pavers down on your yard, do you have to go to the historic board for approval?
I do think we need to clarify those points. I agree that it's ridiculous to tell people they can't put up a new mailbox.
It is.
But, I had a conversation with a fellow property owner the other day who was talking about fencing. Well, there are chain link fences in St. Peter's District, but I don't feel that that's something that contributes to the architectural integrity of any of our structures in that neighborhood. So putting up a chain link fence to me is inappropriate, but that appropriateness is what we have to define.
Well, see,
And I think
that's a great example. Somebody's not muted. It's making it a little bit tough. Can I mute you, Ms. Burrell? Is that okay? That is a great example because what approach do you take? Do we incentivize a better fence? In other words, do we create a program where there are some funds or some way to incentivize a better fence? Or do we just simply tell a property owner, nope, you can't do chain link fence? What if that's all they can afford and they can't protect their property in an area where we have a higher crime rate than the rest of the city? So what I'm saying is we got to get away from the stick. We got to get away from the penalizing. It hasn't worked. We've done it for 3 decades. It just hasn't worked. Whereas let's move to a program where we have plans, we have resources, we have staff, we even have funds set aside to make it cheaper for people to do the right thing.
I want to make a comment. The chain link fence. If my neighbor has a chain link fence, I don't believe I'm taking anything away from the historic preservation of what we're tasked to do. We're tasked to be historic preservation officers, not integrity of a neighborhood. Because if we want to rate the integrity of our neighborhood, we have to take a good look around at what we see. And we have to base it on a median of homes, not necessarily the best ones. And secondly, if you're going to require me to spend more money and do more than the average homeowner, what do I get in return? Because those are associations, and when you're demanding someone keep a certain standard, there's things that come in return, like safety, maintenance on the properties around you. We don't get any of that.
I think the city needs to come up with a plan, city council, and allow funds for owners like you, so they can provide those funds to you guys. And that's something that we have to take to city council.
We're going to be working on that. So that's the longer term stuff that's going to take time and putting together a plan, finding resources, funding, grants. And you're going to be very involved in that as a board. I'm going to come back to you many times in the future over the next year and a half. So that is all to come. We're going to be doing a lot of planning, a lot of public involvement, a lot of public engagement, a lot of public education. I'm hoping you can dedicate some volunteer time to get out there with us and start working with the public. I'm very excited about that part. But on the front end, I just want to be able to make that rule clear that these are the things that require historic board approval. These are the changes. They're changes that require a building permit. If it doesn't require a building permit, it doesn't require historic board approval. And then someone doesn't have to come to us for these little things that they want to do.
I have a question, Mr. Kirby.
Yeah.
This Maria Elena Morales is because a neighbor down the street, corner of Main and Victoria, asked me, there's an old tree that's really a hazard. And she says that she thinks they won't let her cut it down. I broke the sidewalk already. And I said, well, that doesn't seem right that you can't cut that tree down. And I promised that I asked question about that.
Yes, well, that one's a little more complicated because there's a tree ordinance. So I'll call you after and we can chat about it.
Okay, I sent you a chat. I sent the question on chat. Okay.
Because that is a change to a property. Technically, yes, that would have to go to the historic board for approval. the challenge I'm getting into is if I interpret it my way or a way that, like you said, Ms. Sepulveda, oh, that doesn't make sense. Well, then I'm using my judgment. I don't want to. I want it to be clear so that way it's fair to the property owner. Here's the definition. If it requires a building permit and it's a change, it's not repair and maintenance, then you have to submit an application to go to the historic board. Otherwise, though, you want to cut down a tree, you want to plant a tree. That's up to you as a property owner. That's not an ordinance. No, that's not, doesn't require a historic board.
Kirby, may I make a comment?
Sure.
Okay. Working with the businesses and other residents in other historic areas, I know that it is a big deterrent for new investment to come into the downtown area because some of the smallest changes need to go before the board. And if the board isn't meeting for another month or 6 weeks or even longer, a lot of times these small businesses that open up don't have the money to be able to wait that long to open their businesses or to make changes. Like Mr. Gonzalez said, if he wants to paint his porch, he's going to have to pay $100 application fee, and then he's going to have to come before the board to then maybe be told no. And so
if the color changes, he would.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think, I agree with you in this aspect, and I would recommend on my behalf to go before city council and request this, because it needs to be specific for people to know exactly what they can and can't do, and make the process clear for them. And this is one step closer to being able to do that. More often than not, you will have people that, if they're investing in a home or in a business in a historic district, it's because they respect the architecture, they respect the neighborhood, and more often than not, they'll be respecting the colors and changes in that area. So I think we should be leaving it up to them to determine those changes that happen on that.
Ms. Sepulveda, can I ask, can we have a motion to that effect for the ordinance change to allow that only permitted activity only permitted activity that's not repair and maintenance require oversight? And then I'll craft that ordinance and I'll send it back to y'all to look at it. It's going to just be one line change. But then that way, if we do it as a motion, I can see how many of the board members support that idea and then how many don't.
Kirby, I don't see that as a specific item on the agenda for us to vote on. I do think that needs to be put on the next agenda. But I do feel I'd like to recommend to all of the board that we push forward before we make any significant changes. We have new board members on that have not been members and have not perhaps been oriented properly on the role and mission of this board, that we are long overdue for our educational program for this board. The Texas Historical Commission has offered to come and do a training for us. Let's do that first. Let's educate ourselves about what the mission and role is of the board and the staff, and know what it is that we're supposed to be doing before we go and make significant changes. And I would like to request staff to follow up on that training that has been offered to us for the last year and a half or two.
Yes, Ms. Holt, we're working on that with the Texas Historic Commission. And just so you know, all the new members have all received an orientation, an hour-long orientation where we went over the rules, regulations, code, and we pointed them in the direction of these documents so they could review our historic preservation plan and guidelines. And I'm going to be taking this as an item to council, so I really would like a recommendation from this board. It is part of these proposed changes. It's not the sweeping change, that's to come. That's the things we're going to be working on. It's just a very simple change so that we know where that line is between what somebody has to submit before the board and what they don't. So if somebody can make a motion to that effect, and we could just see how many people support that idea, that it's not a birdhouse, it's not a new tree, if it's permitted activity, that requires historic board approval if it's not repair and maintenance.
I would like to make a vote for the permit approval only going to the board.
Mr. Seidman, as I stated earlier, that is not an item on the agenda, and legally we can't vote on that. I think we need to.
put an item on the agenda, and I know plenty of stakeholders that would want to have a say-so, or at least be heard as far as this item is concerned. It's
The item on the agenda is presentation, and there's no action item. There is no action item on the agenda.
He's trying to
Mr.
say,
Brewer, I do agree. We cannot vote on this. There's no agenda item. We can only vote on agenda item 8, which is the consideration of proposed future meetings, but we cannot vote on this. So I would suggest to leave it for the next meeting.
Let me show you the agenda as it was posted.
Kirby, do you need our approval to go to board, or are you just gonna go to?
No,
board?
I don't need your approval. I just want to be able to tell them what your, what the consensus was of
Okay,
of
okay.
this
I'm gonna
change.
be-
So here's how it read. Presentation by staff on the future possible updates to historic board ordinance and preservation plan program. So this is on the agenda. It's proposed future possible updates to the ordinance and the preservation plan program.
I don't feel comfortable voting for that. The wording is just not there on the agenda for us to take any action on that.
Okay. Is that how the rest of the board feels?
I feel the same.
Yes, I think we do have to put an action item on the agenda. This is Maria Elena Morales.
All right, well, I'll draft something up and we'll put it on the next, agenda meeting and have a little more.
Okay. Can you also put that item on the 72 hours?
Yes, every meeting we do gets noticed to the public.
No, but the changes that you wanted, so we didn't have to wait. What did you call it?
Yes, we'd like to see it in writing, please.
We'll do that.
And when will this be going up before council, Kirby?
Sometime after that.
Okay.
Kirby, I've got a question.
Yeah.
Do you have a brochure or something sort of that would be given to prospective applicants that maybe, maybe it could say very simple, simplify the form, step 1, step 2, step 3, and then maybe indicate that, put there, say that the board has approved 98% of all petitions. I don't know. I can't remember the last time we refused somebody outright. But something that gives them a positive sense of what they're going to be doing.
Yeah, we do have a checklist for all of our applications, and if you want to see, you can go to our website and see the historic district application. It has some guidance there, and that's a good suggestion on the publicity of it. I'm not sure that it would be that easy to change the public perception, but it's certainly something we could look into.
Kirby, I don't think that any of us are opposed to change. Change is needed. We all know that and want it and welcome it. And we just want to take it one step at a time and pause and reflect. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Is this the correct step? Let's move forward. So we, look forward to your proposals one at a time and something written for us to review before the meeting. Can we move on now to item 8?
Yeah, so the consideration of the future meeting schedule and time, what I'd like to propose is a change in the time and a change in the day. Now, the time would be 12 noon, like we have our Board of Adjustment meeting. Our Board of Adjustment meetings are at noon. They're on Wednesdays, and it's a lunch break. We provide lunch for we did before COVID. It's just been something we do electronically. And then as far as the day of the meeting, what I'd like to propose, what we can do as well is instead of making it be a set time of the month, we could make it on demand. And that's not in the ordinance. It's just in the ordinance that we meet once a month. But what we could do is we'd have to change the ordinance if we're going to meet more than once a month. But there's nothing that says what day of the month, what time of the month. The reason I suggest that is we don't get more than one application right now a month. So sometimes, like the last time we met was in January. However, if somebody submits an application that's not right by the deadline, they could be waiting quite a bit of time. I'll show you an example. Let's say somebody submits an application on March 18th, a complete application. Because sometimes they might submit an application, they don't get everything actually completed in until the right time. So if they submit on March 18th, they actually missed the March 17th deadline to go to the April 8th meeting. So now they're on the April 21st deadline for the May 13th meeting. So that's almost 2 months later to get before the board. Versus if we had a more flexible schedule in the future, if we change the ordinance so it's not, it doesn't require the noticing requirements like a zone change, it just requires the 72-hour posting like we do with all of it, like a city council meeting or a planning commission meeting for plats. So think about that, Mr. Nance. We can submit a plat for a subdivision with 72-hour notice, but to change, to put in a bird box on a historic preservation property, you got to wait 10 days and mail neighbors within 200 feet. So we're putting it the standard of something higher than we are with our new development, even a whole subdivision. So let's say under the proposed, somebody submits an application on March 18th, and we would just need 1 to 2 weeks to process that application, depending on how complicated it is, and then 72 hours to notice it. So we could have a meeting date, March 22nd to 29th. And how that would work is we'd send you 3 meeting dates, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, which ones can you do at noon? And whichever one we got a quorum on that the majority of members could make, or the majority or whichever one was a quorum, then we could meet that date, call the meeting, and notice the meeting for that date. And now an applicant could get in within 2 weeks instead of waiting potentially 6 weeks or more for an application. Now, without changing the ordinance, the only thing we can do is just change the meeting time and the day of the month. So I would like you to at least consider that we meet like the Board of Adjustment does. We meet at noon. What we found is that the majority of the applicants are professionals who can take a break, who want to work during the day. And we find it's convenient for people to be on their lunch break like we have with the Board of Adjustment. It works very well. We make quorum almost every time. Well, every time since I've been here, we've always made quorum. Whereas the Historic District, having these meetings in the evening, we haven't made quorum. We've missed quorum multiple times. So I guess let me separate that. How many of y'all would be in favor of moving the meeting time to 12 noon? And then the second question would be, how many of y'all would be in favor of meeting more on demand versus a set time of the month?
Let's see a show of hands. Who can meet at noon?
Mr. Gonzalez, both Gonzalez's?
I can meet at noon.
Okay, we're showing Miss Fiore, Mr. Mark Gonzalez, Rebecca Sepulveda,
I can meet at noon as well.
Mr. Nance, and Roberto Gonzalez. So that's 1, 2.
I can meet at either one.
6, 7. So 7. Okay. Can we get a motion to that effect, Mr. Well, can we see on the date of the month as well to see if we can make a motion for both of those?
Mr. Wood, if I may, as some of you know, I teach and I will not be able to meet at noon. So if that would be the case, I would never make the meeting. Just throwing it out there.
And the date, would you be open to a flexible date rather than a set date of the month?
I would. The flexible date would be good, but the time is, I do not agree with that.
Mr. Sepulveda, you're muted.
Can I see a show of hands? Who is in favor of a flexible schedule? Flexible meeting dates?
And that looks unanimous. Mr. Gonzalez?
So I'm in favor.
Okay, with that one will be a little more complicated. We'll try it out and we'll see how it works and we'll adjust going forward. But basically in concept, what we'll do is we will wait till we get an application till we schedule a meeting, and then we'll work with the board to get the date that most board members can meet. And we'll be in communication with you, Mr. Sepulveda, on that. Ultimately, the authority to call the meeting will be up to you on the dates, but we'll give you all the information saying this is the one that most people could make. And you know, it'll be your call.
Kirby, I know that we're talking about making the process accessible to applicants, but I don't believe that we need to meet just to review applications. I believe we need to meet monthly regardless of whether there's an application. And now that we have all these wonderful proposals to look at and to review, to update our work and our planning, I think we need to have meetings to discuss these issues and the opportunity to meet regardless of whether there's an application for us to review.
Well, we definitely will be meeting next month. So, well, we do have some applications coming, so we'll be meeting. I think we have 2, right, Ms. Guerra?
So Becky, what would we do if we don't have any applications?
Well, we have all these plans and proposals to review and discuss the changes that we'd like to make.
Okay, you're talking about then while we're working on this project. Okay.
Well, there's really just the one to consider right now, and that's the one about the permitted activity. Other than that, it will take a lot of development in terms of planning and public engagement. You know, this is going to take year and a half before we get things that we're bringing before the board to consider. But there will be more than there has been in the past, but I'm not sure that it would mean agenda items every month. But I hear what you're saying. You want to meet more often to discuss some of these ideas. And we're certainly going to be bringing more to you in the future, but I don't know that we'll have agenda items every month for you all to discuss.
Could you tell us about when you expect us to have that training for the board by the Texas Historical Commission?
We're in contact with them, and you know, it depends on their schedule. So I think COVID has made things a little more challenging. I mean, yes, we can meet electronically, but not everybody has the same. You know, it's created some complications. We had a scheduled date previously, and then COVID happened, and it made everything difficult. So we're going to be trying to get something here soon, but we want to put together kind of an outline of how we're going to approach these plans going forward. And I think that would be a good time to, if we do bring somebody in, to incorporate the community as well as part of that. In other words, not just a training, but also an opportunity for them to speak to the public and create some interest and generate some interest in the historic district here, in the program. Okay, so the next meeting, then we will we'll work with Ms. Sepulveda on calling that, and then we'll work with y'all. We'll be contacting everybody like we normally do to see if you can make quorum.
Okay, so next item, director's comments.
Yes, just want to say again, welcome to the new board members. We appreciate you being a part of the board and serving. This is something you'll hear me say again and again, and I want to reiterate it so the public knows that you don't get paid for your time. You're a volunteer. You do this because you love your community and you want to serve. And I always want to recognize you every meeting for that. Thank you for your service and for your dedication to the community. It makes a difference. And I'm very much looking forward to working with you on updating the historic preservation plan, the historic preservation program in the district. And we may not always agree 100%, but I think all of us, and I think generally almost everyone in Laredo can recognize there's something very special about the history we have here and the architecture that we have here and the buildings. And it's something that lasts generations, and we want to preserve it. I think all of us here know that, and I think the vast majority of the public know that as well. And I'm excited to be working with you all this on the future.
Do I hear a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
I second.
Motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone? Thank you so much, Kirby. Thank you all.